All right, everybody, thanks for coming today. Welcome to the ROS Industrial Consortium annual meeting. I'm your host, Matt Robinson, and we'll kick things off. Obviously, I try to talk a little bit about the consortium, what we've been working on. Some of this will tie into some of the workshops later in the day, talking about what we've been doing this last year, what we have planned for the coming year, hopefully fostering opportunities to work together. I see a lot of new faces today. Some of you have been around, and some of you who today's your first time or have just been kind of following things, understanding like how we're trying to push this. Sometimes it feels like a rope uphill, right? But how do we work together to kind of progress things? So thanks for taking the time out of your schedules to come today and understand a little bit better about leveraging open source for the betterment of industry. So, welcome. All right, we'll look back a little bit at 24, kind of some of the things that took place last year. And obviously, it's a little bit of first part of 25. And I'll touch a little bit more on the roadmap, and in which case there's actually a printed copy back there. You'll get the markup later today. And then I'll hand it over for a technical update to Michael. So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about, some of the big things that happened in 2024. So we spent some time, obviously. We got a lot of feedback last year. Some of you may remember actually our conference last year in San Antonio, where we had one of our integrator members, RIC Specialties, share some of their adventures, trying to come in totally green and just figure things out from the internet. We've gotten a lot of these questions like, oh, does ROS-I support ROS-2? Like, for those of us who are in it every day, this is obvious, of course. We've been doing ROS-2 for a while now, but it wasn't clear, right? So we kind of went through with fresh set of eyes and did some work on the website. So if you go to rosindustrial.org, there's things like an updated frequently asked questions. If you go up to the developer ribbon, it actually spells out the specific repositories where you can find the software a little bit more, looking back at like, hey, you've now ended up at a GitHub organization. There's like descriptions about what it is it actively maintained, and trying to be a little bit more explicit about the ties to ROS-2, the ROS Industrial Open Source project, and how we're all working together, right? So hopefully some of you have found that a little bit more useful if you're trying to poke around. We also take a look and created what is known as an attic, right? So some projects, they were kind of hanging out in the ROS Industrial GitHub organization that were no longer actively maintained, but there's sometimes like, actually just this week, we were talking about some prior projects, and you can archive these projects. But the nice thing is about creating an organization, moving them into this notion of an attic, is that the discussions and issues, you can still have conversation, ask questions about these repositories, as opposed to archive, in which case all those other functions are shut down. So that was kind of the call. So if you've heard of a ROS Industrial project, you're not finding it in ROS Industrial or ROS Industrial Consortium, there's a good chance it's in the attic. And so we thought that was nice. Makes very clear what is actively maintained and maybe what's a historical project. Again, I touched on a little bit about the frequently asked questions. You'll notice there, is ROS Industrial compatible with ROS? The answer is yes. But now there's this like a couple different explainers around ROS-2, which is new for this year. Just trying to be as upfront and clear as possible for those that are interested or having questions. Even this week with the news of ROS-1 going end of life, Kat will give an update here shortly on what's going on the versioning and noetic ending, but obviously helping people transition from ROS-1 to ROS-2, or what tools they have to actually still leverage good ROS-1 code in a ROS-2 ecosystem. So we're trying to spell some of those things out. We're obviously doing some updates to documentation and trying to add more training documentation and make things a little bit more clear around ROS-I and ROS-2. So I do this every year too, right? So for those of you that have been members for a while, or if you're new to membership, where do these membership dollars go, right? So we appreciate, obviously it does a lot to support. A number of you take advantage of by asking questions, requesting online meetings for support. And I just talked about all this work we did on cleaning up repositories, adding documentation. So where does that go? Like, right, so this is some of the investment. We're here, this is actually last year's, basically where the dollars went. And the good news is you'll see the pie slices for software maintenance and technical support are a little bit bigger. That's good, the tech support growth. We've had past years where tech support's only like 3%. So this is good. I always come here and I remind you that is a member benefit. If you have questions, if you're struggling with something, we're here to help, right? So feel free to pick up the phone. We set up like a virtual web meetings. I know a couple members, we've supported you on ROS-II control, for instance. We're happy to do that. The training slice of the pie is actually a little smaller because there's more tech support. And last year, the annual meeting was a little bit more of a bigger slice of the budget because, we made it a 2 full-day event. We wanted to make sure people had time in the lab. So we try to make that, when it comes to San Antonio, we try to invite members if they want to share something, come down and show stuff off. That's reflected in the investment. So in general, like obviously I have some charts that show a little bit more historical. I'd say the biggest change is the annual meeting and tech support are a little larger than they have been in the past. In general, training's about the same. We do 3 training events a year. Next training event's in July. I'll touch on that in a moment. But this is kind of where the dollars go to keep things moving. I'll touch a little bit on now getting into the roadmap. Some of you this is like a summary of, I believe, 2023's whiteboard adventure. So you'll notice the whiteboards are back, or the easels. But this time I've actually appended the roadmap so you can mark it up, ask questions about it. But this is basically, every year we go through, we sort of consolidate the feedback, make sure we're having resources or we're getting into the plans for the capabilities, the stuff that you're asking for, right? So obviously you'll notice some stuff about AR, VR in the bottom left. About 2-3 years ago, AR was really hot. Obviously, requests for easier ways to interoperate, like say for instance with HoloLens, it's died down, right? Unity interoperability. But obviously, like interoperability more broadly is still of interest, right? So those are things we're actively working on. But this is just a good example of kind of how do we take advantage of when we get together to get that feedback, right? And make sure we're keeping it alive. So last year we all got together. Those who came by my easel after Harry Pearson's presentation about their audacious vision for autonomy flight robotics. We talked a little bit about like, what is it, the things we're trying to do, right? Like what things should ROS Industrial have on their roadmap to move the ball forward in capabilities? And I created this. I was like writing all over and drawing arrows, and it was a real mess. And I have Harry's talk as the blue dot in the upper right? Because Harry always talks about this blue dot. And I had this hanging in my office probably for a couple months, and I was like, I got to turn this into something people can understand. And so I created this, right? And so I shared this in a member meeting in January to kind of show you our progress in turning like a lot of the member feedback into something, a plan. And so we have this, right? Where we talk about applications, and we have these classes of applications or functions we're working on. And then like, obviously there's these capability modules, and Michael's done a really great job of bringing the language or idea of modules to this community, to the people we interact with, things like Nether and Tesseract, right? And how do these interact, and how do we realize capability, right? What does that mean? And how do we enable process optimization? So this is obviously, I've borrowed this from Michael. This is the idea of like scan and plan, and then the blue circles are our modules, right? So it's basically the separated out nuggets that do a certain function in a pipeline that realizes an application, right? And then obviously the nice thing is, depending how if we do this right, we can get this like little bit of a circle on the bottom left, right? This idea where they get better, right? So every time we work together, be it with toolpath planning, right? Nether, some of you have some experience now with Nether. Any of these tools, like if we iterate and work together, hey, improvements happen, they get better, they get more use. And because they're sort of like, they're not being so overly customized for one specific application, there's not a bunch of stuff left behind, right? So that's been really a powerful idea. So that modularity. So this is the roadmap that we created at the time. I have a couple little pointers. There we go. Right. So what are we trying to do? We have a couple, actually, we talked a little bit this week for those who are on the show floor about application examples. So in the past, we've taken some of our demos we've brought here. We actually keep maintaining them. Automate 2023, I think, is the kind of the go-to, where it actually has a manipulator and you can download it. There's a containerized version, and we include a mesh you can bring in. And you can actually drive and interact with it, and it's based on Scan and Plan Workshop, right? And then Scan and Plan Workshop brings along all the modules that we talk about, right? So we like the idea of application examples. That prior demo, we use it and steer people there if they want to see something fully built out. Like, what does it mean? How do we use these behavior trees at the application level? There's some examples like that. And then obviously, as we move along, we want to get to the point where folks that are actually deploying things, and if they're willing to share, what other examples can solution providers share with us and talk to us about, right? So the more examples we see, it becomes less intimidating. it becomes something that like our daily integrator or solution provider partners can do. And those are sort of the things we want to get to. Obviously, we've been trying where we can, and Michael might touch on it about creating containers to facilitate a little bit easier deployment. So we have some pilot programs going in that direction, but we look forward to feedback on how that's happening. Obviously, we talk a lot of things about like no code. You know, it's a great idea, but we know that there's still work to do there. But we do want to like lower that barrier through having more intuitive tools that more people can take advantage of. So that's hopefully what we'll be talking about. Getting into the events real quick. Obviously, we have we do developer meetings. We've hosted one recently. They're marching along. AP will be hosting one in March, or is it saying March? Or March was AP, I guess. Sorry, I guess I have the dates right, but there's an AP. They're occur, I believe, on the second Tuesday of every month, and we rotate around. So you can find those at that link. We're hosting our training events. We have one in July in Wichita. The March link is just for the past one. And so we're working with Spirit Aerosystems to have a training event in NIAR. That registration is open. So if you're interested in coming out, getting some in-person ROS-II training, we encourage you to check that out. It's really great when we can have it at different sites because you get to network with a different set of other developers. There's a real value in doing the training in person. Obviously, we're here May 12th to the 15th. And of course, keep an eye out for ROS-Con. There's going to be a lot of activities there. It's co-located with the ROS-I AP annual workshop. So our colleagues here from Singapore at ARTC and the ROS Industrial Asia Pacific Consortium will be having their event co-located with ROS-Con, so stay tuned. Michael is efforting getting a workshop that should be of interest to this industrial community. Last year, he did a workshop on toolpath planning. The nice thing is when those workshops happen, I know sometimes this audience doesn't necessarily go to ROS-Con, but obviously when we have the opportunity to do the workshop, that becomes now new educational and training content for this community, right? So we always try to like take advantage of these and like leverage them and refine them based on feedback from other developers and of course you, the industrial users. So stay tuned for that. Anyways, another thing that's coming up, and we'll have a workshop if you've looked at the program or the website on this idea of a best practice for OEMs. So I know we have a lot of stories this week about our wild rides, getting various ROS applications to work with different kinds of hardware because different people take approaches on creating their interfaces, right? So what can we do to provide guidance to OEMs? So one, it doesn't seem like such a lift to create and maintain an interface, right? If they already have a decent streaming option and an defined API, creating a thin ROS wrapper essentially shouldn't be that big a deal, right? Or it's not that big a lift. And there's different ways to do that through partnerships. Obviously now with a little bit more of some of the modern frameworks like ROS2 control and micro ROS, it's a little bit easier than ever to take advantage of nice interfaces, right? So we want to like talk about that and talk about it in the context of good, stable behavior, right? And so what can we do to help OEMs understand? It doesn't have to be that difficult. There's some things you can do. There's some testing, but then also for those who talk a little bit about like, yeah, I need to interface, but then I want this idea of interoperability. And what do we mean by that, right? So obviously, if I really want to get down into like the motion execution level, semantics matter, right? So even though we have like now really good interfaces where we can actually move things like get the joint states and have some of these things happen, we may not have true interoperability just because different OEMs and how their controllers work manage basically trade-offs on path, accuracy, and velocity a little bit differently, right? Relative to configuration as they get through various waypoints. So we need to make sure like if that's where we'd like to get to, how do we work with our OEM community to help them like see the value in that and go in that next level? So we're happy to kind of support those conversations. Also, while we're here, I might pick your brains about what we want to do for 2026. Some of you may have heard that Automate in 2027 is going to be in Las Vegas. I don't know. So we have to take into consideration, do we go back to Automate in 26 and then SWIRI in 27? Also, if ROS-Con comes to the Americas, do we co-locate with ROS-Con? Right, so these are all some discussions. So I'd love to pick your brains about the sites and what our options are. Obviously, when we come to SWIRI, we're able to have our collaborators, members like yourselves, come and show off what you're doing and have like much more like kind of soak time compared to like what's going on in the exhibit floor here. So keep that in mind. Also, I want to touch on, we demoed SWORD today. The consortium provides feedback. We want tools that are easier to use. A lot of you had asked for being able to do stuff from CAD because you use CAD in your daily workflows if you're supporting factories or product development. So Sword is that thing, right? And so Michael can actually answer questions about Sword. We have the ability to give you trial licenses, and also we've pushed the price point down pretty aggressively, right, to make it accessible as possible. But like, we need some revenue to kind of keep the tool alive, just because obviously we're trying to supply both on Windows and Linux, and make sure it's fully featured and be able to answer tech support questions as they come up. So if you want to, that is something that's purely driven on the voice of this community. So hopefully, if you find it useful, if you want to start poking at building out ROS systems and being able to do more of it directly from CAD, this is a tool that could help. And that's it. So basically, obviously, this is a picture from last year's blending program in collaboration with SFSA, Iskawa, and PushCorp. But obviously, as we walked around this week, right, a lot of folks are using ROS. It's no secret. Actually, some places they're a little more secretive about it than others, but you can usually tell. There's usually clues, and a lot of people asking about having their solutions interoperate with ROS. So that's exciting, right? It's no longer this thing that's like, wait, you're going to do what with open source? And that's a testimony to the good work that's coming out of this group and a lot of the developer community, and of course the startup community. We're working hard to make sure the resources are there to help you guys in aiding companies realize progress, but there's still work to do, right? It's a continuous journey, but when we work together, there's more that we can do. So that's all I want to leave here. Hopefully we have a chance to talk. If you have questions, if your teams are having a hard time, that's what we're here for, but we work together, we can get more done. So thanks. Keep providing feedback. Don't be afraid. I have thick skin. Don't take it personally. But with that, I'm going to introduce Michael. He's going to get a little bit more on the technical side of things. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Matt. As you mentioned, my name is Michael Ripperger. I'm the tech lead for the ROS-I Americas Consortium. So I'm going to spend my time today kind of looking back at what we said last year of what was our vision for, like the technical vision for the ROS-I Consortium for the Americas, and then talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the past year to kind of pursue that vision, and some thoughts about where we're going with that. And then hopefully through some discussions later today, we can kind of gather some feedback and see if this direction kind of aligns with what you guys are thinking, and are there other places that we could be improving and things that we could be developing that would be helpful for the community. So, it's been a year. We've all slept since the last time we talked about this. So I kind of wanted to kind of rehash just a little bit. But this vision that I sort of see for the technical side of ROS-I Americas, at least, is for us to kind of create a really nice and intuitive toolbox of different modules for doing advanced robotics applications, right? And so last year we kind of talked about, hey, it's really hard to make this awesome killer app that just works for everybody's applications and just kind of covers everything, right? And so we've been focusing kind of a lot and pivoting from that and saying, hey, we can't do that, but we can make some really, really nice tools that are easy for you guys to use and build up custom things. So that's really where we've kind of pivoted our focus over the last probably 7 or 8 years. And to me, that's kind of my vision going forward, is making those tools as nice as possible and as easy to use and kind of full of features to do really, really neat things. And so from a developer experience, I'd like for everybody who uses these tools, right, to be able to kind of look at them, read the documentation, and have a really good idea of what capabilities are in there, and have some examples about, hey, how do I take this thing and do something with it, so I don't necessarily have to like call Sweary or call somebody else or go in and read code to really figure out what's going on. So that's kind of where we're trying to go with a lot of these tools, just making them very intuitive and much easier to use, and having some examples to say, okay, here's how we did a really neat thing with these different tools. So I'll kind of rehash this slide a little bit that Matt brought up, but basically this is kind of our view of what this ROS Industrial, at least the Americas side, our ecosystem kind of looks like, right? Like we're pretty somewhat focused on this idea of scan and plan, right? And so we've got a lot of different modules that support that, things like sensing, and those are, perception algorithms, but also things for calibration. We have things for toolpath generation, motion planning, executing these motions on actual hardware through drivers, and then the application level pieces, right? And so over time, we've kind of filtered out what was maybe a really big monolithic scan and plan application into these different modules. And I think we've been successful there, and it's helped us a lot make a lot better, more interesting, kind of more unique instances of scan and plan that are sort of easier to customize. So this is kind of my view of our ecosystem, and hopefully over time we can kind of make those more and more cohesive and add new bubbles as kind of new technologies and things come up that we want to support that are important for us. And kind of like Matt mentioned, right, our development cycle looks a little bit like the drawing on the bottom left, where you kind of have to go make something, and after we make it, we reflect on it and think, okay, hey, what are the important pieces here? Kind of distill the relevant kind of kernels from that, and then potentially refactor, kind of reorganize that, and go through that process to really make sure that these modules that we're providing are things that are clear and useful. And so that's a bit of our kind of development strategy there in a little graphic. So anyway, so that's cool. We talked about this. So, how are we doing, and what have we been doing over the past year? So I wanted to touch on a couple of different repositories that we've been working on. Obviously, this is not everything that we've done this year, but hopefully these are kind of the highlights. And if you guys have questions about other things that aren't covered here, find me afterwards. I'd definitely be happy to talk about some of the activities and the things we're not talking about. But Tesseract, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is our motion planning environment. So this is very similar to MoveIt, but it's got a lot of features that help us support scan and plan type applications a little bit better. And so we've been developing Tesseract for quite a while now. And part of this year's discussion has been, hey, how do we get to that 1.0, kind of stable release? It's been a bit of a pain point for us, and probably for those of you who are using Tesseract, is that it changes frequently, and that's kind of part of that development process for us to kind of figure out, what's important, how do we introduce new features. But we're getting really close to this version 1.0 release. If you're interested in the tasks that we see as being critical for this 1.0, we've created an issue that I've linked up there where we've got these checklists, and we're kind of going through those things, trying to reach this stable point where we can say, hey, the API is pretty close to where we think it's going to be long-term, and we're not going to make tons and tons of breaking changes all the time. So we're getting a lot closer to that. Hopefully we can get there by Q3 or Q4 this year. So maybe sometime October, November timeframe, we'll have that. But we've been making progress on that task list for the past probably 6 or 8 months, and things are looking positive there. So that's an exciting development for us. We've also been doing a lot of work on the documentation for Tesseract, right? That's yet another thing that's just hard for all open source projects, right? And so I'll talk a little bit more about this for Nether, but I think we've got kind of a nice template for how we want to do API documentation, and we're trying to kind of integrate that back into Tesseract. Again, letting that be kind of your first stop in terms of, hey, I want to use this tool. Let me go to this nice web page where I can kind of get some high-level descriptions, see some examples, see some videos, and then if I really want to dig into the API, I can do it there as opposed to having to read into the code. So we're in progress on that task, but look forward to that in the next year. I think that'll be a really nice improvement. Sort of along the same lines, we started our monthly developer meetings for Tesseract, I think, this year. So we had started them a couple of years ago, and then they kind of fizzled, but we brought them back. And so if you guys are interested in kind of hearing about what we're developing, if you have comments or thoughts about what we should be doing, we're hosting these developer meetings, I think the second Thursday of every month. It's posted on Discourse. It's an open meeting via Zoom. So if you're interested in joining, please do. We always welcome feedback, and it's a really nice time for us to gather feedback and just kind of have some discussions about what we're doing to make sure that it aligns with what the community wants as well. So some kind of technical code updates, some big things here. If you guys have used motion planners in Tesseract, they're all kind of based on these profiles, and that's how you configure them. And so we've gone through that and added a common interface, with our sort of end goal being to be able to support those as plugins. So then you could write your own task profile for a specific type of planner and be able to provide kind of customization hooks for you. So that's part of our 1.0 release, and we're making steps towards that. We've also done a lot of work on, or Levi's done a lot of work on improving debugging through the RViz Workbench plugin. And so now it's kind of the graphic that we have on the top right. We've got this ability here to kind of, have the ability to serialize basically everything out of Tesseract. And so we can load up a log from the motion plan and kind of look at the results of everything in our motion planning pipeline, and be able to visualize them as either Cartesian waypoint trajectories or joint trajectories. So you can see, hey, if my motion plan failed at some point, I can find out what that point is and go look at the trajectory that came out sort of before and after that point to see what exactly was going wrong. And so that's kind of a big pain point for us doing motion planning debugging, is that before we haven't really been able to introspect in that sort of way. So that's really exciting for us. And in the same way, we kind of are serializing the dot graph of how this whole motion planning pipeline panned out and providing relevant messages in each of those. So if some step fails, you can really pinpoint, hey, it came from this thing and this is what it said, right? So this is not necessarily the end all be all, but it's some really nice steps going forward to kind of improve the usability of Tesseract. And in addition to that, right, we're also looking into providing better Python interfaces. There is an existing Python library for Tesseract, but we're looking at sort of better, more Pythonic ways to kind of provide that, as well as looking into some web integration, mostly for visualization. So we don't necessarily have to be in RViz. We can do something that's maybe a little bit more accessible across devices. So some pretty exciting things there. So we're chugging along towards that 1.0 release. In terms of calibration, we've worked quite a bit, maybe over the last 18 months, on improving and kind of solidifying our libraries for sensor calibration. And so this past year, we really focused a lot on providing a GUI for this, right? So previously, it was a lot of launch files, a lot of configuration stuff that you had to do, in an IDE by hand. Now we've actually provided a GUI, right? So we've got some examples of how do you collect data for calibration, and now you can load that up into this GUI, configure it, run your calibration. You can look at the images that you've collected, make sure that you can actually detect your target and that things look like they're correct. And then we get a lot of error metrics and results and things being posted out in that GUI as well. And so hopefully this is another step towards making these tools a little bit more usable. We've got a lot of ideas on some future steps here in terms of, I think this GUI is specifically for extrinsic calibration, but we can provide utilities for intrinsic camera calibration, as well as like PNP optimization, some other cool things, right? And so the idea here is hopefully trying to get as much of those tools as we can into a GUI in kind of an intuitive way. And again, we've been doing kind of the same steps on documentation, right? We're in progress on converting the documentation for this repository into a website that we can host on the repo, sort of in the same way that we're doing for Nether and for Tesseract. So look for that in the coming years, and coming months, not that long term. And we've got lots of really good examples out here as well with data sets to say, hey, this is an actual data set that we collected. You can see, the different types of targets we support and things like that. So some cool, interesting developments on the calibration front here as well. And so the other thing I wanted to touch on here is our toolpath planning repository called Nether. Matt mentioned it a couple times. So again, we've been doing a lot of the same type of work on Nether. And so over the last probably 18 months as well, we've been taking a lot of things that we've been doing as a part of the scan and plan repos and making them capability modules in Nether. So that's things like surface segmentation, primitive fitting, modifications to toolpaths to support different types of processes, like approaches and departures for grinding, sort of baking all those things into the Nether framework itself as plugins. Things that kind of had gotten squirreled away in instances of scan and plan are now sort of been migrated back into Nether, which is pretty exciting for us. And again, this is plugin based, so you can provide your own capabilities, and Nether itself can serve as a framework that kind of puts all these things together so you can customize the piece that you care about, but then leverage all the other things that we've been doing across all sorts of different applications. So like Matt mentioned, I did a workshop at ROS-I this past year on just generally what is Nether and how do we use it and how do you customize it. So if that's interesting to you guys, I put the link up here for the repository I put together. I think the presentation is out there as well, but it's got some examples and what we actually did in that particular workshop. So if you're interested in Nether, check out the new website that we created, but then also check out this workshop as well. A lot of interesting content there, trying to do some kind of weird things that you might not want to do, but are hopefully kind of enlightening for how do you customize Nether for something that's not necessarily supported out of the box in the repo itself. So another exciting development for us is that we're getting a lot of university contributions from our friends at Iowa State and Ohio State. So that's really awesome for us. That's been mostly through the Focus Technical project that we're running for blending. But that's obviously really cool and something that we're really trying to engage with the community, right? Is how do we get contributions back? How do we get this in the hands of people who can customize it? How do we bring those contributions back? So we're really excited about that. And if you guys have contributions, obviously, to any of these tools, please let us know, and we'll figure out how we can make that happen. So I got a limited time left, so I'll kind of breeze through a couple of these. So a lot of these contributions and improvements, again, have been in support of improving scan and plan workshops. Again, we've been using this as the basis of our focused technical project for doing blending for foundries. So lots of cool improvements there. Do multiple region selections. We're adding different ways of adding collision objects from scans, improving planning pipelines, making sure that we're up to date with all these cool changes we're introducing in Tesseract and Nether. So lots of cool changes out there. Like Matt said, we're also continuing to containerize these applications. So you should be able to download them and run them in simulation to kind of check them out, kick the tires and see if there's some interesting pieces there that you can utilize. Matt talked about Sword. I won't belabor it too much, but again, we're kind of trying to bake a lot of these different developments from our open source tools into Sword to just give it a nicer front end, right? Where you can kind of do maybe 80 or 90% of your development here in a CAD environment where you don't have to think about code. You can really learn how to use some of these tools conceptually before you dive into writing code. We think it's a really great tool for that, and we're excited to kind of keep developing there. So I've got maybe a couple slides on what's next. I've got lots of ideas. Don't have time to talk about all of them. But one thing that's kind of missing from our updates, in my opinion, is things about perception. I think that's maybe a growing gap in some of our capabilities right now. We leverage industrial reconstruction and kind of TSDF-based methods a lot, but I think there's some really cool things that are happening out there, especially in AI for perception and surface reconstruction. So I think we should start thinking about what are some of those tools and what are the sort of applications we can chase with these tools. I think there's a lot of things that we can also do from the tools that we have for richer integration into motion planning. There's lots of artifacts that we can produce from this TSDF-based approach that could make our motion planning better. We got to think about how do we do that? How do we do it effectively? And there's lots of cool new sensors, especially like event-based cameras, neuromorphic sensors that I think could be really interesting for some of the applications we're working on. So I think those are some cool things that I've got in my mind for perception going forward. So if you guys have ideas, please let me know. We can maybe brainstorm how do we introduce some cool new things into our ROS industrial ecosystem. So with that, I think I'm going to skip my other slides. Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks for being here. Excited to talk and see what we can do in the coming year. So
thanks, Mike.
Thanks.